Okay, all right. Getting my Zoom thing set up. So thank you to everyone for joining. My name is Malia. I am the Community Resilience Fellow with the Alaska Children's Trust. And before we go any further, I want to talk a little bit about the Zoom atmosphere that we're in today. Right now, we are on Zoom meetings, and that means that if your camera is on or your audio is on, we can see and hear you. So if you don't want us to be able to see or hear you, simply turn off your camera or turn off your audio. And if you have any tech questions throughout this event, you need help with Zoom, you can go ahead and send me a message in the chat. My name is Malia again, and I'll try to help you as much as I can while working on these other things. And also, so everyone is aware, this panel is being recorded. You can feel free to use the chat function throughout the event. In fact, we encourage you to, take advantage of this time to communicate with other parents on the call and to provide words of encouragement. We only ask that when you're using the chat that you come from a place of empathy and understanding. Toward the end of this event, there will be a bit of time for questions. If you have questions, I ask that you please save them for the end instead of putting them in the chat, just because sometimes the chat gets very active and questions can get lost, and we don't want that to happen. Before I introduce our panelists, I wanted to take a moment to acknowledge that we're all coming into this space from very different perspectives. Some of us are coming here today because talking with our kids about equity is a matter of life and death. We're talking to our kids about these issues because they have to know about them in order to survive. And others are here today because talking to our kids about equity is just how we make empathetic and responsible adults. And I'm sure there are others here today who are just here to learn for themselves. But regardless of why we're here today, it is always hard to talk about equity with our kids. It can be hard to know how much to say or what to address and where to start. It's hard to explain the instances of hate that we see in our lives and in the news. And it's hard to cope with the reality that we can't always protect our kids. And that's why we're having this conversation today. Each of the people that's on this panel have very different lived experiences and different backgrounds. But most importantly, each of the people on the panel have been in these exact same shoes. They have thought about these conversations and these questions. They've had these conversations, and I'm sure they still have questions to this day. So in this conversation today, no one is the expert and no one has all the answers, but each of these wonderful women has a wealth of knowledge that they are willing to share with us today, and I'm very excited to get that started. Before we continue on, I just want to give a brief little introduction for each of our panelists. Let me change, there we go. We have one panelist, Celeste Hodge-Groden. Celeste is a civic leader from Anchorage with a long history of working on issues of equity. She has served as president of the NAACP Anchorage branch, director of the Municipality of Anchorage Office of Equal Opportunity, director of the Shiloh Community Development Incorporated, and she is now the president and CEO of the Alaska Black Caucus. She has also spent time working in politics, served on various boards, and she testified before the U.S. Commission on Civil Rights in 2001. Eva Gregg is an Inupiaq storyteller and change maker from Kotzebue. She served as a social worker with the University of Alaska for 5 years, and she now works as a community coordinator with the Rural Alaska Community Action Plan, otherwise known as Rural CAP. Eva has experience through the Office of Juvenile Justice and Delinquency Prevention, and Eva has dedicated much of her work to helping Alaskans who suffer from alcoholism and drug dependency find their way out. And you can see this through the many grassroots and community efforts that she has participated in. And last but not least, we have Polly Carr. Polly Carr is a social change activist from Anchorage. She has served as a Trailside Discovery Camp educator, a program officer for the Alaska Conservation Foundation, and she is now the director of the Alaska Center, which is a position she has held since 2013. In 1998, Polly helped Alaska's teens launch the Alaska Youth for Environmental Action, which is a program that still thrives to this day. Polly has also served in various political positions, volunteer positions, and advisory boards. Each of these women are also mothers, aunties, and friends. Some of these women are now grandmothers. And today they are talking to us as parents who have had these conversations with their kids about racism, sexism, and prejudice. And so now I will get things started. We have a set of questions we will ask our panelists today, and they will spend a little time answering. At around 12:50, we will have time for questions from the audience. And thank you so much, Eva, Celeste, and Polly, for joining us today. I'm so grateful that we're able to have this space and to be able to just, talk with each other and talk about these big feelings and learn and commiserate and just have this space to talk about the things that a lot of us have been afraid to talk about. So without further ado, I will get to our first question. And commiserate and just oh, I'm getting a little bit of an echo.
I'm muted.
Can everybody hear me?
Yes, now I can hear you.
Okay. Did we hear the last bit?
No.
Okay, how much did we hear?
So I heard it all.
Okay, all right. Well, I will go on to our first question. Hopefully everybody was able to hear. Our first question for our panelists today, can you tell us about the first time that you talked with your kids about issues of equity? How old were your kids and what motivated you to have that conversation? As well, how did you approach the conversation and how did your kids respond? And just so everybody knows, I'm going to copy and paste these questions into the chat so that everybody can, look back.
So hello, everybody. As shared, I'm Celeste Hodge Grouden, and I will go first on this one. So for me, race and racism is my lived experience. And I know how brutal racism is because I've lived it. I continue to live it. And one of the things I did with my daughters, I have two children who are now in their early 30s, but I'll never forget the time Celisa, and she's my oldest, she was 5 or 6 at the time. She was attending Rabbit Creek Elementary School out on Huffman. And we lived out there, my parents lived there, and it wasn't typical to have people of color, Black people, living in that neighborhood, at least at that time. We were the only Blacks on the street, and she was actually the only Black in her school at Rabbit Creek Elementary. And I'll never forget the time Celisa came home and she was in tears, just crying, because all week long she had been talking about her friend at school who was going to be celebrating her birthday. And they talked about her birthday party. And Celisa was going to get an invitation to this party. Unfortunately, her mother or grandmother, I can't recall right now, but who worked at this school, shared with the little girl that Celisa would not be able to receive an invitation to this birthday party because she was Black, and they were going to be having a swimming piece. I don't know if it was in the swimming pool or the bath or whatever, and they did not want her Black skin to rub off on the other children. And so, I had to look at Celisa. And first of all, for a parent to see your children feeling this pain, this hurt in such a way that is not fair and is not right and is not just. You know, it's just devastating as a parent, but at the same time, you know, you have to do something. And so in conversating with Salisa, you know, I just shared with her that you are beautiful, first of all, and your skin tone and color is beautiful. And no matter what anybody says to you, you just know that you're a beautiful person. And sometimes people are going to treat you a different way because of who you are, the color of your skin, maybe the way your hair looks. And you have to realize that and recognize it for what it is. But that has nothing to do with you and your abilities to do great things because of who you are as a person. So that's my first encounter with my daughter, being as young as she was, um, dealing with racism. And the fact that this was a teacher at a school, you know, and I'm thankful that the equity policies have passed within the Anchorage School District, because I'm hoping that teachers will now be held accountable for actions like that. But, you know, it was devastating to my daughter, and the fact that she still remembers that to this day from so long ago. So I know we're limited with time, but I'll end there.
I'll go next. So the first time I had the conversation on racism and how it impacts individuals was with my son. And this goes back. So was in first grade. It would have been 26 this January, 27 this January. And he was getting called names in school. One, he's half Native and he was half Black. And so the racial slurs that he experienced, you know, that was our first touch of racism for my children. And I had that same talk with him too. And his question, you know, that talk that you had with your daughter, and explained to him he was beautiful no matter what he looks like, yada, yada, yada. And his question was, but why do they treat me differently? And I had to explain, because people have their own fears, they have their own biases, they have their own judgment calls that drive their life, and we don't have control over that, but we do have control over how we treat people. And I should say that I had 5 years of education at UAA. That's where I earned my bachelor's degree. And, you know, as a Native woman, I've experienced racism all my life as well, too. I didn't always have the right tools on how to navigate those situations, but I'm learning, and that's that would be my suggestion, is learn what it is and how it impacts our lives, and how it systemically it's embedded in our systems of care, and there's so many facets to it. It's like such a complex subject, right? And there's emotions attached to it. And with those emotions, those typically people are attached to those emotions. So how do we host these conversations when they're painful, when they're scary to talk about? One, nobody wants to always, they don't always want to air their dirty laundry, right? So just being brave enough to come to something like this is astonishing. I'll stop there too.
Really moved by your stories. I am zooming in from unceded Dena'ina lands here in Anchorage, and a mother of a 10-year-old daughter. And I just first wanted to say I'm really humbled to be here and want to recognize the myriad of Indigenous, Black, and parents of color that are blazing the way in raising our kids to be both aware of and lovingly support a more just Alaska. And also the many white parents that have allied in that effort, because I think of all of those people as my teachers. And I know as a parent of a white child that my daughter might experience these issues differently, and it wasn't being the target of prejudice that that was part of spurring that first conversation. When I thought about this question, I think there was what I'd call the precursor to an equity conversation, and it was more about the foundational building blocks of having empathy and being kind. My daughter was just entering kindergarten, and I talked with her about, being kind to her classmates, looking out for kids that might seem alone or lonely on the playground, inviting them to play, and standing up for people if they were being treated unkindly, no matter who they were. And I think honestly, I was motivated by my own memories of childhood and those moments of feeling alone or scared. And that combined with what I was seeing in the world around me made me want to start her out on the right foot, through observation and developing like a keen awareness of others' experiences. And I think she responded well to that, because I think it was a very sort of like basic concept for her. That same year, I had her join me in a meeting in Kotzebue with many Indigenous colleagues and their children, and she got to go ice fishing and learn about Inupiaq culture. And she was also the one white kid in this larger crew for 2 days. And I think she really felt something about A, being the only person of her identity in a group, and B, seeing a true culture of sharing, which is very much a part of equity. And after being immersed in that experience, I felt like I could talk with her about, Alaska being a native place and to respect Indigenous cultures and history. And so I think for me, building up empathy and appreciation for others and learning the concept of sharing were like really strong building blocks for later conversations I've had to have with her about issues of inequity. And I'll stop there.
Yeah, thank you all for your answers. We can go on to our next question now. As parents, it's our job to protect our children, but we cannot always protect our kids from the dangers of racism, sexism, and prejudice. How do you comfort your kids when we cannot fully protect them? And how do you help yourself cope with this reality?
So if no one else wants to jump in first, let me just say, I just want to back up and respond to something that Polly shared, and that is how important it is to have allies. I mean, we need our allies, because we're not going to be able to move the needle like it needs to be moved doing this work alone. People of color need allies to stand in solidarity with us. And so I appreciate, Polly, what you shared. And, it's so important to educate our kids on this whole issue at a young age, because I'm fearful that there's going to be much change anytime soon. And so we have to work and work and work at this. And it is exhausting work. It is so exhausting, as Eva shared. And when we tell our stories, and in fact, sometimes I have to turn my camera off because we relive that painful experience that we try our best to shield our kids from. That the racism and hatred and that's running rampant today, not just in this country, but in this state. And as a person of color, we know this up close and personal. And so just going back to the question, I think about, the fact that we have to be educating our children. It's not a choice or an option for people of color. We have to let them know about this ugly thing called racism early in life for our children. And in fact, the fact that we have the talk with our kids is of life and death, because we see regularly how people are of color, Black people, are treated in this world. Where we have you already know the story. I don't need to rehash it or go back through it, but it's so important for us to communicate with our children, the importance of knowing who they are and what hand they are dealt because of the color of their skin, and the consequences that they suffer because of who they are. It's unfortunate that our kids, that we as people of color, can't focus on life itself because we're so busy trying to stay safe, trying to live, trying to protect our children. So education is key. It's critical. It is a must. I'll stop there.
So I'd like to jump in. So here's some of my story. I had two older children. They're not with me anymore. And my son is half Native. Well, he was half Native and half Black. And he was murdered a few years ago. And he was murdered by his white friend. So yes, this is a matter of life and death for our children, and even for ourselves, because my life hasn't been the same since that's happened.
Are others having issues? Oh, yeah, it looks like she's skipping. Eva, can you hear us? Okay, well, that is a very powerful moment for that to step off, but I will send her a message. And Polly, if you, oh, can you hear us now, Eva?
I can. I'm sorry, I guess I froze.
Yeah, it happens. The last thing we heard is talking when you told us about what happened to your son, and it affected you too. That's where it left off.
I was saying, that his murder impacted everything about my life, and it's given me more drive to do this work. I do most of my work from my kitchen table, so my younger two children hear the conversations that happen here at this kitchen table. And then after work is when they come to me with their questions. And the information I give them is information I get from credible sources, right? With credible information. And then we have the conversations, and I let them ask me questions that they have the desire to have answers for. And if I don't have the answers for, sometimes I flip that script and say, well, what do you think? But it starts with me being able to educate myself about the issues and how we can change their narrative. And we know what the problems are. We know what the statistics are. That is everywhere. It's on the board, whiteboard. We all know those numbers. They're terrible. But what are we doing to change those numbers? And for me, I do one interaction at a time. Otherwise, it becomes too much and I'm overwhelmed. And I'll stop there.
I'm just again sitting with what I'm hearing from my co and really grounding in just like the privilege that, you know, I bring into this conversation. You know, as a white child, I grew up in a total bubble of privilege, completely ignorant to racism, even though it existed all around me and within me. And my family didn't talk about it. And I wish we did talk about it, but I don't think they had the tools or awareness, frankly, to guide me. And therefore, I didn't have the tools to be aware of racism, sexism, prejudice, to protect myself or others. And instead, I was probably complicit in these things. And I think that's a collective wake up call for so many white people in this country. And so, to me, the most important way to protect our kids from these isms is to talk about them and arm our children with empathy, a strong sense of self-worth and community. And I agree with Celeste that education has to start at a very young age, because I know it's a matter of life or death for so many, as Eva also just spoke to. And I know I have the luxury of choosing whether to speak about it. And, you know, I look at my daughter sleeping at night and I think how lucky she is that she will not have to face some of the threats that her friends will face, and also that she'll face challenges as a female. And that makes me want to move with a lot more urgency. And so I think we need to bring our children into protest of racism, sexism, and other threats when and where we can. You know, I think letting my daughter see me gather with others to stand up for what is right, I think gives her courage to do so, and also a sense of community, which I think is the most important antidote for people to survive these impacts. So I'll stop there.
Thank you, each of you, for sharing those stories and for taking the space to be vulnerable and letting us learn from that. You know, I can't express how grateful I am. I'm going to go ahead and move us on to our next question. It is a longer one, so I'm going to post in the chat before. So modern media has brought the fight for justice into the hands of nearly everyone, you know, via cell phones and computers. And while this has helped shed light on the issues that are facing marginalized people, it has also created a world where we are constantly bombarded with graphic depictions of violence, such as the videos of George Floyd's murder, the shootings of Alex Toledo and Ma'Khia Bryant, and the attack on Bill McCarry. So how do you navigate this media world with your children? Do you at all shield your kids, or do you talk with your kids about the hate crimes and the violence that you see documented in the news and on the media?
I could go first on this one if my co-panelists want. I'll just say, you know, like I said earlier, like I bring my daughter into protest of these things. And in the past several years, which I relate to my co-panelists, it's probably been many, many years, but in the last several years, you know, I can't count how many rallies and meetings I've dragged her to where she's exposed to both the racist or other violence, but also the powerful community that's coming together to say, this is not okay, this is not right, and this is not how we want to live our lives or our future. You know, like when the Pulse nightclub shooting occurred, we went to a vigil together at a church in Anchorage, and we talked about why people who do things out of hate and why it's important to push back with love. George Floyd was murdered on my birthday last year, and when we were preparing to attend a Black Lives Matter rally here in Anchorage, my husband and I, we sat down with our daughter and we said, we want to talk to you about what it would be like if we were a Black family and you were our Black child, and all of the precautions you would need to take because of police violence directed at Black people. As the violence has ramped up against AAPI communities, I talked with my daughter about Asian American and Pacific Islander classmates she knows and the business owners we know, and what had just happened not only to businesses, but what was happening to people throughout our community. And we wrote notes and delivered them with bouquets of flowers to each of the business owners we know. Honestly, because it was one of the only things I could think of doing. And I wanted her to also know that doing something is better than doing nothing. And at first she was shy, but then she wanted to be the one to walk in and deliver the notes. And I think through those direct experiences, she's just building an understanding of how to support people and be in community with them, especially when terrible things are happening. So that's really where I'm at in this question. I'll stop.
So I'll go next and just share that what we're seeing in the media is nothing new. These kind of things have been happening for hundreds of years. We're just now we have the tools to video, record, and share. But this is nothing new. And I think it's important to allow our children to know what's happening in this world age appropriately. And so I just think about myself being a student here at Bartlett and what I learned, which was not true history. So we walk away thinking that people are great, that I even think about the doll test from that was utilized in the Brown versus Board of Education, the little black doll and the little white doll, and how the black doll was all negative and there was nothing good with the black doll, but the white doll was just perfect, beautiful. And so
I'm sorry, if anyone is unmuted, can you please mute yourself?
So I think it's important that, again, we have the education and that we allow our children in or to be able to learn and see, as long as it's age appropriate. I mean, we don't want them at the age of 5 to see a knee on the neck. But, there are some things that can be learned from that can be shared at an early age. Thank you.
So I'd like to agree with Celeste. This is nothing new, right? Here's the thing, we're in a pandemic. And what the pandemic has done is brought this out into, it's no longer overt, right? It's very in our faces these days. And we live in a digital age. I mean, come on, this discussion is happening on Zoom and it's being live on Facebook, right? And I bring up the pandemic because my grandson, who's 11, is attending Zoom school, which is probably why my internet is freezing, because he's upstairs Zooming right now. So, if I don't keep my younger children abreast with what's going on, then I'm not doing them a service, right? I'm simply not. One, they should be aware of what's happening, because if we're out on the streets of Anchorage and something goes down, then they need to be prepared to act, right? They need to be able to respond to what's happening in a safe manner or get out, one way or the other. So, the conversations are always going to be hard. Life didn't come with a manual, right? But when we sit down and we have these conversations honestly and openly and with transparency, I think we're all going to learn something from somebody somewhere along the line. Even our youth, right? They have their own perceptions of what's happening, and they should be able to be safe enough to come to me and tell me what they're thinking and what they're feeling. And if they don't come to me, then they're gonna find someone else who's gonna talk to them, right? And who knows who they choose with what information that person might be sharing with my child, right? So all I know is if I keep that communication channel open with them, when they come to me with the little things, maybe, you know, that practice of talking with them about the little things, when the big things happen, they'll feel safe enough to come and speak to me.
Yes, thank you. I will move us on to our final question for the evening before we move on and open things up to questions from our participants. This is the big one. What is, if you could give one piece of advice, what's the one piece of advice that you would give to parents who are getting ready to talk to their kids about equity? And this could be for parents who are getting ready to have the race talk, or to talk about protests and events, or to talk about an experience, or just about the world in general. You know, what's that one piece of advice you would give?
So,
And if you can't break it up into one, that's all right, but I'll give you that space.
and maybe I'll start and then come back after, because I've been wanting to share after our panelists say something. I want to jump back in, but I want to be obedient to the plan here. But I will say, you know, for me, the important piece of advice I can give is to have the conversation. Don't shield your children from a conversation about race. It is so important. Like I envisioned, here's, I know this is crazy now, but I thought, okay, racism is going to go away because all the older people will die off, pass away, and we'll be okay. But because we're not having the right conversations, we're not doing a lot of the work with our children, we're still fighting this huge obstacle, this systemic racism. And if we think it's going to go away on our own, it's not going to happen. It's just going to get worse. And so, if we really want to move the needle on systemic racism, we have to engage our children in the conversation. And as parents, adults, we have to have those uncomfortable conversations ourselves. We just have to do it.
Yeah, and I guess I'll just go back to that notion of empathy, because, you know, if our children can learn the importance of trying to understand someone else's experience and really feel for that person's experience, even though it might be very different from their own, then I think it makes the conversation around equity that much more powerful. And, you know, we can see among the adult community that not having a foundational building block of empathy is a root cause of fear and hatred about others not like them. And I think it also causes people who are aligned on values against anti-racism to not speak up or step forward to get more engaged and support those that are experiencing these issues. So I think empathy and really rooting that concept at an early age is important. And then for the rest of it, to the degree people are comfortable, I just say bring your child into the experience as soon as possible. You know, I think our children know so much more than we give them credit for. And in my opinion, the earlier we can expose them to what is happening around us, what might be happening to them, or what they might actually be imposing upon others, then we can give them the tools to push against what is wrong and grow up, you know, doing what is right. And I also wanted to mention, for adults that are thinking about this, some amazing resources. Growing Alaska Leaders, or GALS, is an amazing network of parents advocating together on equity issues, and they provide me a great sense of support and community. The Alaska Coalition of BIPOC Educators and their Saturday Reads program is an incredible resource for just bringing kids in and learning more. And the Alaska Black Caucus community events each week have also been really helpful to me. So I just think, like, a sense of community as you're entering into this process, or wanting to learn more, do more, is really powerful. And we have some incredible resources right here that we can be looking to.
So this has been an amazing conversation. I have things happening in my kitchen. I apologize for the background noise. And I just want to reiterate, if you don't know where to start with this conversation, start reading books, right? Start educating yourself. Watch YouTube videos. There's lots of videos on YouTube that could, you know, start your educational path on racism. I don't have all the answers, you know, and I don't pretend to act like I have all the answers, but Polly keeps bringing up empathy, and I really like that, right? So learn empathy skills and teach those to your children, right? It starts at home somewhere. The changes have to start somewhere. And for me, in my life, the changes have to start in my family with me, right? Taking action and following through with that. Trying to give my grandson and my daughter, my younger two children, 18 respectively and 11, enough knowledge where they're out interacting with the world outside of our home, that they know how to be a good human being amongst other human beings. And I'm responsible for that, right? So I take that very seriously. And if I can't teach it here, what empathy looks like, what it looks like to be a good human being, then I'm not doing what I should be doing. One, as a mother, as a daughter, you know, as a friend. So being able to be out in the world and interacting with other people from all walks of life, right? Because we all have a story, we all have a life history, we all have a family history, and you know, life is filled with traumatic experiences. It's also filled with a lot of beauty too. So when that happens, that those interactions happen out there, it is my hope that as a mother, I'm preparing my children to be good human beings and good allies in the world, whatever they're doing in their lives. And so education is a big part of that. I'm either teaching them to be good human beings, or I'm being passive and not teaching them what it means to be a good human being.
Yeah, thank you, each and every one of you. You know, I think one of the things we've learned this evening is the kitchen is a powerful place. A lot of good things happen there. Celeste, Eva, and Polly, you know, I don't want to limit this space too much. If you want to take a moment, if there's any, you know, comments or anything that the other panelists said that just sparked something you wanted to say, please take the space to say that now.
So for me, I just want to reiterate again how exhausting this work is. You know, again, because every time we tell our story, especially I'm talking about people of color, I'm talking about myself now as a Black person who has continuously lived this whole racism I'm a product. I'm a product of racism, the effects of racism. So when you see me and you don't know my story, or you say most Black people are angry people, or you know, you walk away with some mindset about who we are as a people, just make sure you know our history, which as a Black person, I don't even know, because unfortunately, I didn't get that as part of my education growing up. You know, even when I attended UAA, and I specifically took a class on Black history, it wasn't taught by a person that looked like me. So there's a lot going on within the BIPOC community that brings us to where we are today as a people. Just try to get to know our story. And the other thing I want to mention is the fact that, you know, sometimes we're invited to be a part of the conversation where people want to learn, and our conversation is hijacked. When really all we need for you to do is just listen. I mean, if, because I continue to hear about, you know, being educated, learn, you know, the history or get some history on this whole racism piece. But when we come to the table to share, there's nothing that you need to do but kind of just listen sometimes.
I'll just sort of echo Celeste's comment about BIPOC, you know, parents and community members feeling exhausted. And I think, you know, something I wish for is that more white parents would step into this space. I sometimes experience friends who feel like this is activism, but I don't see caring about our fellow community members as activism. And I think that if more white allies who share these values of anti-racism and equity would step into the fold, I think it would help the whole effort more. And I'm just really grateful for all the people that are doing that. Yeah, I just wanted to emphasize that point that more of us need to be engaging. I need to be doing more because I don't want our Black, Indigenous, and people of color community members to be continually exhausted in trying to inform and educate others.
Thank you both. If we're ready, we can move on to questions from our participants who are on with us today. If you are on the Zoom with us and you have any questions, now is a good time to drop those in the chat, and we'll try to address as many as we can before we head out for today. We do already have one question from the Facebook Live chat. And I'm gonna post the full question in the chat, and then I'll just kind of ask about the all over theme out loud to everybody. So one person, their child has participated in, you know, in activism in trying to disrupt these systems, specifically, you know, posting pro Black Lives Matter content. And they are receiving threats because of it. And I think this is not a unique experience. And so where can you go? Who can you talk to, or simply what can you do when you are trying to disrupt these systems and you are being threatened because of it? And I realize that, you know, like I said, we're not coming onto this space as experts in everything. I think all of us are on here. All of our panelists are here today as parents who've been there. And so I understand, you know, there's definitely resources that we can try to find and send to this person. But if y'all have any thoughts or any suggestions, go ahead and let us know.
So I guess for me, my first question is, you know, I know that they have school resource officers within the schools, and I thought that there was a comment that says that the student went to the school resource officer. Is that correct? And if so, then I'm interested in learning more about that situation, especially if it wasn't resolved. And I'll also say that it's unfortunate sometimes when we try to do the right thing, people aren't appreciative of it. And they try to do whatever they can to stop you. And I just continue, and I just said this last night. And I think a lot of the times I say it because I have to say it to ingrain in myself so that I can continue to believe it. But we cannot grow weary. We can't get tired. We can't in doing good. We just can't, because when we get weary or tired of doing good, then we stop the movement. And I take those words straight from Congressman John Lewis. We can't grow weary in doing good. We just can't. But I would like to help resolve that situation.
Yeah, and on the heels of Celeste, I would say the same thing. And I think this point of like, how do we create community around these responses is really important. Like, we can't let an incident like that just like fade away. And so it sounds like you're in the Matsu. I'm in Anchorage, but would definitely like to know more about this. And then, in general, I was just gonna post this resource here in the chat. Holla Back is doing some really great intervention trainings, especially for people who are dealing with whether it's a community situation or a police situation, and the different ways you can think about how to intervene. So again, just, as we're all trying to build community and working on this stuff together, I would just elevate that, and would like to learn more about this situation.
And let me just piggyback off of that. Eva talked a little bit about this already, how huge systemic racism is. I mean, it's everywhere. And I just think about the school district, as I received a call the other day from a teacher who was trying to do this work, to help eradicate the systemic racism, which we all know exists within the school district, unfortunately. And even as a teacher, she's met with resistance. And so not only are students having to deal with this, teachers as well. And it just goes to show how much work there still is out there to do. It's huge.
Right, we have more questions. I also want to let people know, if you want to unmute yourself to ask questions, don't be afraid. You can let me know. We have our next question in the chat. Someone says their child would come home from school and be called maktuk, which is a derogatory term used against Alaska Natives. And they're wanting to know, how do we incorporate positive Native identity into our growing up and into our being when this is happening, and when so often the general population doesn't recognize us as valuable humans or doesn't recognize that we even exist.
I want to jump on that one too. I mean, I'm just like, you know what? Okay. I am so excited. Again, I said this already, but I'm sincere that we finally got on the books within the Anchorage School District the anti-racism and the instructional equity policies. That will go a long way in dealing with some of the stuff that's still out there. Remember, I shared at the very beginning, my daughter, who was told by a teacher, her girlfriend told her that, but the mother worked at the school, who said that, these comments about the blackness, you don't want the black skin to rub off on her children. See, so this has got to stop. We cannot afford to have this continue. And so, again, I'm just appreciative, very appreciative of everybody that came out who spoke in support of these policies, and they passed. So this is a beginning, and we just all have to continue to work at this.
So I want to bring up Can you guys hear me? It said I was muted. Okay, so microaggressions, these are microaggressions that, I mean, they happened when I was going to school, right? I mean, I was told not to aspire to be nothing more than a cook or a dishwasher or a bowl cook. You know, a bowl cook is someone who cleans toilets. You know what? I put myself through college cleaning toilets. Thank you very much. And I supported my children that way too, while going to school full time. So, you know, Celeste is right. I am 54 and I have, you know, she brought up that she's a product of racism and I am a product of historical trauma that's happened here in Alaska. I'm going to share that I have a 10 out of 10 on my ACEs score, right? Everything I have checked off, everything that's on that ACEs score has happened to me. And so that it's still alive, it's still happening to us. And I'm tired too. I am tired, but I'm still showing up to the best of my ability with what I got. And I'm trying to keep an open mind. And part of that, keeping an open mind, is checking my own ego, right? Knowing that I have areas where my knowledge could be improved, and knowing areas where I have knowledge that I could share as well, and keeping that boundary and taking care of myself, right? I don't think we've touched on self-care yet. You know, I've lost 2 of my children to the systemic disparities that happen to people just like me every day that are out there, and they need help, right? They need help with areas, in all areas of life. And we have these resources. It's just a matter of connecting them so that that safety net, that we can have these conversations like this, is available to all of us. You know, working against the tide, right? The racial tide. We got to put on our life vests, you know, while we arm ourselves with knowledge of how do we get through this. And I keep saying, we all have a piece of the puzzle. Every single one of us is here because we want to change what is happening, right? And we all bring one special nugget of what we can do and share that with someone, then we're taking a step forward at least.
And if I can just share really quickly, I know it's time to go, but you know, for us, people of color, we can't turn this off. So I know individuals, you know, who are not people of color can come and listen, but then at the end of the day, you can turn off and go on about your business. And what we're asking you to do is to stay tuned, stay on board, and to help us make change. Don't turn this off when you leave here today, but turn on some action. You know, what can you do to help move this needle on systemic racism?
Yes, thank you all so much for this wonderful event today, and thank you to everyone who attended. I know we have some questions we were not able to get to, and I'm sure there's more questions that might come in. And you know, I wish we could spend more time, but truly this is something that we could talk about for a very, very long time. And I would just like to express, you know, how grateful I am. You know, I'm Tlingit from Southeast Alaska, and I'm taking care of, I have a 14-year-old sister who I share custody of. And it can be hard to, you know, ask people about this advice and to learn, you know, to know that other people are in it with you when you don't always have people to talk to about it. And so I'm very grateful that you have all spoke about this topic today. I'm very grateful that we have so many people who care enough to show up, and I hope that those who care enough to show up and to watch on Facebook, take what Celeste said into account and keep doing this work, not just for the 1 hour that you're on Zoom, but for the rest of the life that you're living, whether you are, a person of color just trying to, move the needle for yourself, or standing up, being an ally. Don't give up. And even when you're tired, rest, but keep up the good fight. So Gunashish, you will all be getting a follow-up email from me with all of the resources that have been sent out today, and with all of the other resources that our panelists might want us to forward along, and my contact information as well, in case you want to contact myself. And I will also send out a survey where if you had a question that you wish we had gotten to, you can type it in there, and we might be doing events like this in the future, and we can take those questions into account. So thank you all so much for joining, Gunashish, and I hope you learned some helpful things today.